There are copies, extra copies of the Base and Bits magazine. If you don't get that, or if you'd like an extra copy, they're also at front registration desk for pickup too. So, little treats for your attendance today. All right, for this afternoon, we have as our next speaker is the acting executive director, or is it now full-time executive director? Thank you, Jolene. She is the acting executive director, took over for, as many of you know, Mike Anderson used to have this position, and he's now retired as of May of this year. So she is the acting executive director for the Housing Finance Agency for the state. We see a need for this program, I know in Williston, as rents have exceeded the ability of some of our residents to pay them, especially the ones on fixed incomes. Our average rental price right now for a 2-bedroom apartment is about $2,500 per month. So you can imagine somebody on Social Security with a farm wage at $600 a month is not going to be able to live in our community anymore. This is the type of program that helps with that, and we're excited to have Jolene here to give us some information and updates. Please welcome Jolene Kline.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Brad, for the introduction. What a pleasure it is to be here. This is the first time that I've ever actually been before your group, and I was shocked when I walked in this morning to see how large of a group. To that, I have left this handout on the ends of the tables, and if it has not made its way down, please send them and let me know if any of you don't have a copy, because I'm going to talk about that at some point during my presentation. Brady asked me if I had put together a PowerPoint for this group, and I said no, I simply didn't have time. That's partially true. I'm on the road an awful lot. As Brad said, I'm acting executive director, but I'm still also doing my old job, which was the planning and housing development division director job. So it takes me out of the office an awful lot. Another reason for not doing a PowerPoint is because you're always adjusting them. It's a PowerPoint for each group because everybody's interests are a little bit unique. I want to keep this as much of a dialogue as a presentation. I don't believe in standing up and lecturing for an hour, and hopefully this won't even take an hour for you to get the message. But to that extent, please ask questions. Raise your hand if you have questions as I'm talking. Opportunities for Affordable Housing is the name of this session. The legislature in this spring gave us what's called the Housing Incentive Fund, or reauthorized the program, gave us $35.4 million to help address affordable housing needs in North Dakota, with the primary focus on that being housing essential service workers, and that's the message that I want to get to you folks. The bad news is the $35.4 million will be fully committed following the close of the second quarterly funding round, September 30th on Monday. This was supposed to be funding for a 2-year biennium period. The bill went into effect in May when signed by the governor, and within 3 to 3.5, 4 months, we will have exhausted all of those dollars. What that does mean for you, though, if you are county employers, because there was that focus on essential service workers housing, there are units being developed out there to house employees of cities, counties, state, medical facilities, special emphasis on law enforcement housing, on teacher housing, as well as those employees of your counties, cities, etc. All right, so a little bit of history on that whole program and how it works. It started out in the 2011 legislative session. In the spring session in 2011, the legislature gave us $4 million. It wasn't a cash, it was a state income tax credit. We were challenged with selling credits, dollar for dollar credit against your state income tax liability for contributions into the Housing Incentive Fund. In the special legislative session, they increased the funding level on that to $15 million. And then this past session, they reauthorized it, and like I said, gave us $35.4 million. That's comprised of a $20 million state income tax credit and a $15.4 million appropriation. So we entertain applications from nonprofit, for-profit developers to use those funds. We put those funds out into the project in the form of equity to help reduce the amount of debt that the project has to take on, and in turn, for having a lower debt to service, they then can charge lower rents. We limit it to no more than 30% of the cost of the project that we'll put in the form of equity. Now, that's structured as a loan, but only for enforcement reasons. There is no prepayment requirements on that money. The expectation is that the state will not get any of that money back. We put that on again as a loan because if a developer, for some reason, does not abide by the representations that he made in that application, does not keep those units income and rent restricted, we have the ability to declare that note in default and get that money back into the state. So, but as long as that project operates as intended, it is a forgivable loan after a period of a minimum of 15 years, and the term of that loan is tied to the permanent loan. So if it's a 20-year perm on it, we have a 20-year long-term deed restriction on there. Because we are funding 30% of the project with state money, 30% of those units in those buildings have income and rent restrictions. The income and rent restrictions vary by project and by community. They can be as low as 50% of area median income, which is probably in that, somebody earning or having Social Security of $25,000 or less per year. We're also interested in housing those workers of more modest or moderate income. So we can go as high as about $65,000, $70,000 for a household. So the intent of the program, number one priority is housing those essential service workers. Number two priority is housing households with lower incomes, including seniors and people on fixed incomes. So that's where you'd get into that 50% targeting. Demand for the funding, like I said earlier, has been incredible. We went out with our first quarterly funding round June 28th. We had a very quick turnaround on that legislation because we wanted to get these projects started as soon as possible, take advantage of this, the 2013 construction season. Excuse me. I'm going to grab a glass of water there. We had over $36 million in requests for the $35.4 million. The projects were good projects. We could have technically funded all of them. What we did do is we knew that there were a lot of projects that were still in the works. They weren't able to get them put together in a basically about a 6-week time frame. So we ended up funding 18 projects, and we've conditionally committed about $20.4 million as of right now. As I said, we're coming into another quarterly funding round. We expect that we will get 2 to 3 times the requests for the $15 million that we will have left over. So it's going to be extremely competitive. What I want to talk about today is this sheet and the opportunities for you as employers. And if you go over, this will tell you where the project is, where it's located, who the applicant was, what kind of targeting they did with the units. But of particular interest to you should be that section called Essential Service Workers. My apologies. Because there's opportunities for you. Those developers who targeted essential service worker units within their projects are in the process or may already have contacted you to find out whether you have a need for employer or employee needs in your areas. Now we're looking at school districts, again, city, counties, those kinds of things. So to the extent that you have not been contacted yet, that doesn't mean that you won't be, because this list will be expanded following the close of our September 30th funding round. So you have opportunities. It does not require any kind of financial commitment on your part. We were very clear to our developers that we are not looking for any kind of guarantee of rents or any kind of commitment like that. It's simply a right of first refusal, that if that project in your community has essential service worker units targeted, So let's just pull a project out. I'm going to pull Beach out, for instance. A 12-unit project we funded in Beach with 6 units targeted for essential service workers. So if your school district is trying to recruit teachers into your area and is having problems recruiting teachers, law enforcement, whatever the case may be, you have a right of first refusal if you enter into an agreement with that owner where you can lease 3 of those 6 units for your school teachers. If you don't have need for 3 units ongoing, that developer has the right then to go to other essential service worker employers in that community to fill those units. If there isn't a need for targeting those, then those units become available to anybody needing affordable housing in your community. Questions up to this point? All right. So these projects that are funded here have, yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
How long are they kept open? How long are the units kept open? You could find that you have a vacancy mid-year, say in the school. Those units, how accessible are they throughout the year?
These projects are underwritten with very little cash flow. And I would say 30 to 60 days. They're going to know 30 days ahead of time when they've got that vacancy. They're going to approach you and say, I have a vacancy, July 1, do you need this unit? The stipulation is that if you were one of those, you were the school district, you had that right of first refusal on those 3 units. You don't need it today when it becomes vacant. They can fill it with somebody else, but the next vacant unit, they then have to come back to you and say, okay, I have another vacant unit, do you need it now? So it's going to be kind of a moving target, but we aren't going to force these developers to keep units vacant for any extended period of time for your employees. Any other questions at this point? Okay. So, where do you go from here? First of all, we're working with these developers here, they have conditional commitments. They're in a 60-day window now where they have to get permanent financing lined up. They have to look for raising contributions for their fund. Remember I said that the fund was capitalized by $20 million in credits and $15.4 million in general appropriations. So what that essentially means, if you are a developer, and I'll pick on John Phillips here from LSS Housing because John received some credits or some funding from this program. So let's say we gave John $1 million award for a project. That is going to be consist of $430,000 in cash and $570,000 in credits. So it's up to him to go out and find contributors into that fund for that $570,000 piece. He's going to be looking at a combination of individuals, corporations, businesses, oil companies, financial institutions, whoever has a state income tax liability who can contribute into that fund to support his project. We as a state are very actively marketing the program, and I'm here today to tell you about it because we want the program to be successful. We want to help him raise that $570,000. Is it difficult to raise? Depends on the community and how the community feels about that project. In support of the legislators in the room, the message that I heard during the legislative session was they want that state tax credit piece in there because they want that local involvement, that local participation. The state's doing a share, but the local government has to, or the local businesses have to believe in that project and buy into it. So how that tax credit works, it's a dollar-for-dollar reduction on your state income tax liability. If you paid $1,000 last year to the state tax department and you anticipate that your liability is going to be $1,000 again this year, if you write the check to the Housing Incentive Fund, that would directly offset your liability when you pay your taxes in the spring of 2014 for the calendar year 2013. So you're basically just prepaying your taxes, and instead of writing the check to the state tax department and having it go into the general fund, you write it to the housing incentive fund. You can designate the project in your community that you want to support, or a community in general as opposed to just a project, or you can put a region or a county. We maintain multiple little buckets within that fund. So all contributions that have come in to date towards that 20 million, there's multiple buckets out there. There's some buckets where there's projects already submitted. There's other communities that have buckets where somebody wrote a check where we may necessarily not have a project yet. So what happens at the end of the year, or at the end of when we've committed all of the 35.4 million, if there's a bucket that has money in but there's no project in there, we're going to put those dollars into the nearest project in that vicinity. Once your dollars hit the fund, they don't go back to you, they go to another worthy project. Today we've raised just under 6 million of that 20 million. And I forget who it was this morning that talked about, I think it might have been Lynn Helms. U.S. Bank wrote a check for $3 million to help support the fund. Last week we got a check for $500,000 from Marathon Oil, and we got a check for $250,000 from MBI Energy Services. The oil companies are stepping up. That was both of those companies, their third contribution into the program. They made contributions in 11 and 12 into the previous fund, and now they've made their contribution for 2013. Marathon has put a total of $3.5 million into affordable housing. In MBI, it's just about $1.5 million that they've put in together. And why are they doing this? Yesterday morning, I was at the Bakken Construction Summit in Bismarck at the Civic Center, and Kathy Nessett did a presentation there. And she said that, in her opinion, the lack of housing in North Dakota is one of the critical impediments to that industry. And why is that, why is that important? Because they are constantly training people, because their people are living in crew camps right now. And so those people cannot bring their families here because there's not sufficient housing. And so instead of bringing their families here, they're tired of leaving their families back in their home states, and they're going back home after a period of time as soon as their financial situation changes. Now, with state money, are we concerned with housing oil employees? No, that's not what this program is. What this program is intended to do, but it's that ripple effect. We need to create affordable housing so that some of that market rate housing, or more of that housing, is opened up for their employees. And the market rate housing is truly bringing people out of the crew camps. And I probably didn't do a good job of explaining that. But we need to make sure that there's sufficient temporary housing, that those temporary workers have opportunities to move into permanent housing. We also need to provide affordable housing for all of the service sectors, those secondary jobs that are being created as a result of the oil industry. As Senator Wardner said to me during lunch hour, and I thought it was excellent, he said, I'm tired of going to Walmart and not having any checkers there. Well, one of the problems with filling those jobs that aren't necessarily low-paying jobs, but lower-paying jobs, is those people can't afford to live in these communities because there is no affordable housing there. So we're looking to house the service sector employees so that, and by having more services, more service companies, more service-related businesses, more restaurants, more hotels, more Walmarts, Menards, those kinds of companies in these businesses, that makes your community stronger and makes that oil company want to keep doing business in your community. So we need to raise the contributions. We also need to encourage legislative support for this program to be reauthorized again at the next session, to be funded at an adequate level. The governor had requested the legislature to increase the funding from $15 million from the previous biennium to $50 million in this biennium. Our legislators in the room were supportive of that, and I thank you for that. But at the end of the day, and literally at the end of the session, the program was reauthorized, but it was cut from $50 million to $35.4 million. Clearly, when you have a program where you've got demand, requests for more than that amount within 6 weeks of when the bill went into effect, or 8 weeks, that tells you that it was not funded at an adequate level. So let your voices be heard to your legislators and legislators across the state that this program is critical to helping address affordable housing across North Dakota. All right. I'm really... Questions on this here form? Anybody? Okay. I'm going to just kind of talk about a couple of, pull a couple of random projects out of here. Not because they're more important than other projects, but Wolf Run Village in Watford City. That shows up as a 42 unit with 18 of those essential service worker units. That project is complete, and all of those units are essential service worker units. It is law enforcement, it is teachers, and it is city and county employees that are filling that building. The Lignite Housing Project, the 28 unit in Lignite, that project is actually going to, we're going to have a ribbon cutting on that in late October or early November. There will be teachers in there as well as other political jurisdiction employees. Turtle Lake Housing Project, there's a couple of people here from Turtle Lake that came over to my booth, talked about that community. Even though that shows up as 0 for essential service worker units, they anticipate that project will be filled by families. They're trying to bring young families into that community, keep that school system thriving, as well as provide an alternative housing for seniors, which in turn, when you provide that alternative housing for seniors, that opens up their homes for new families to come in and become home ownership candidates. This program, I should have said, is strictly rental housing, it is the state century code for our agency requires that it be 4 or more units of rental housing in order for it to be considered multifamily. And that does not need to be a 4-unit apartment building. It can be 4 single-family homes operated as rental, or it could be 2 twin homes in that example, but it must total 4 or more units. Let's pull the McKinsey Healthcare Systems employee housing in Watford City. That is a 24 units. That is actually being built by the healthcare system there because they needed healthcare so critically that they couldn't wait for a private developer to come in. They had the land available on their campus, and so they're actually putting in 24 units. 18 of them are going to be for their health care, for their nursing home, and for their lower paid hospital employees. And the reason that they chose to keep 6 units outside of that inventory is they're going to be market rate units for traveling locums, for for doctors and nurses coming in on a temporary basis. The legislature wanted us to create that essential service worker housing so that they could get what they call non-traditional landlords out of the business of housing, school districts that had to put up housing to house their teachers, cities that had to build housing, counties. And so we did a survey, and some of you may have responded to that survey in spring asking whether or not you had to become a landlord. You were forced to become a landlord because there was no available affordable housing in your community. And so we ended up with a pretty extensive listing of non-traditional landlord-owned housing, and the intent of the funding was to help bring those numbers down. Well, what we found was that there was so much pent-up need for additional essential service worker housing that we actually haven't reduced that number, but we have been I think, successful in keeping that number from growing. Although I did talk with somebody from the Killdeer School District in the room this morning, who said that he's in a position of having to add to his list of school-owned units to bring teachers in. So, clearly, again, that, and there's different circumstances in different communities. In some case, it might just be that there's no land available to develop on. It might be a lack of developers. But the overall goal is to keep those numbers from increasing and reduce those numbers of political jurisdiction-owned units. I think that's really all the message that I wanted to get out. Thoughts, questions, concerns? Will these essential service workers, and if you're in any of these communities where these projects are located, will you take advantage of them? Do you have a need for those units? If you are from those communities and you are not aware of that particular project, feel free to give me a call and I'll get you in touch. I'll provide you with the contact information for that developer so that you can initiate that conversation. Because like I said, they're out there actively trying to solicit that agreement with you to house your employees if you are having trouble housing your county employees or your city employees. All right, well, I guess I did my thing in helping you get out of here on time, or early. Thank you very much.
I got just a little card of appreciation as well, Jolene. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
On the personal side, Jolene, I can tell you that the city of Williston has 80 apartment units under contract with private entities right now at a contract rate of about $2,000 a month. So we can take more of the essential housing up there than we even have right now. So because I think your rates are closer to $1,000 a month than the $2,000. So, but we've also found if we don't provide the housing, we don't get the employees. I can't haul garbage just unless I have somebody driving a truck. So it's important for us. So I appreciate the program. Also, a big thank you to the oil companies and the financial companies that have been participating in this program. Continue to involve them in your needs. Continue to educate them as to the program, because I look for it to get bigger and better, hopefully next time in the next legislative session. The need is definitely there. Thank you again, Jolene.